I stood just outside the kitchen doorway, the hallway light, casting a sliver of shadow across my slippers. My fingers gripped the tray. 2 mugs of coffee, one for me, one for Camille, though I suddenly had no desire to share anything with her. "She'll never hear this," Camille whispered, her voice slicing through the air like a hot knife. "She's practically furniture at this point," she added with a dry laugh. "Once the old bat signs the house over, we're out of here. I already called the contractor about ripping out those god-awful floors." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. For 14 years, I lived in silence. At first, the world faded. Gradually, muffled words lost music, entire conversations slipping away. By the time it was completely gone, I had adapted. I watched mouths move and faces shift. I nodded when expected, smiled on cue. They thought I didn't know how they spoke to me about me. But 2 weeks ago, everything changed. The procedure was experimental, expensive, and deeply private. I told them I was visiting an old friend in Idaho. Instead, I was in a recovery suite in Portland, listening to the world come alive again. Birds' cars whined through trees, and now this. Camille poured herself a glass of wine. I heard the cork hit the counter. "She just sits there like a ghost," she continued. "If Max doesn't push her, she'll die in that guest house with a deed still in her name. I'm not waiting another 5 years for that cabin." I turned and walked back down the hall. Footsteps, slow heart pounding. My son's voice never joined hers. He wasn't in the room, but he hadn't stopped her either. Not last week, not the month before. I set the coffee tray down on my writing desk and looked out the window at the tall trees swaying in the breeze. It used to be comforting, that stillness. Now it felt like a warning. They didn't know what I could hear now, and I didn't intend to tell them. There was a time I used to fill this house with music, piano in the mornings, the hum of the radio in the kitchen, my husband's laugh echoing down the hall. That was before the silence swallowed everything. Before the world stopped speaking to me, and I stopped expecting it to. After Leonard died, the quiet grew thicker. It crept into the corners of the rooms and curled up in my chest. Max came around less. He said the long drive was hard with work. I believed him until I saw the vacation photos on Camille's feed. Ski trips, wine tastings, weekends in cities I was never invited to. When Max remarried, I tried to welcome her. Camille was all sharp smiles and louder than necessary speech, like I was dim, not deaf. At first, I thought it was nerves. Later, I realized she simply enjoyed control. The changes began gradually. My worn coffee pot disappeared one morning, replaced by a sleek silver machine that hissed and dripped like it hated being touched. The curtains I'd sewn myself were swapped for pale drapes I couldn't stand. She called it refreshing the space. I called it erasing me, one object at a time. Max stopped asking how I was. He started treating me like a task. Grocery runs, doctor appointments, and always the same rehearsed smile when he dropped me back at the cabin. "You good, Mom?" Then gone before I could even nod. I adapted. I smiled. I took their scraps of affection and called it family. I told myself it was enough. But now the silence is gone. My hearing this miracle was mine alone to hold. Camille didn't know I heard her plan. Max didn't know how closely I was listening. They thought the cage they built was soundproof. It used to be, but not anymore. They may still see a deaf old woman sipping coffee from the wrong cup in the wrong part of the house. But I see them. I hear them. And for the first time in years, I'm the one holding the door. Dinner was meatloaf. Camille claimed she made it, but I'd seen the frozen tray in the trash an hour earlier. She lit candles, folded napkins, and filled the table like she was hosting a magazine shoot. It wasn't a meal, it was a performance. Max poured wine for himself, and Camille not for me. She gave a quick, patronizing shrug. Too risky with her meds, she said to him, not even pretending to include me in the decision. I smiled, fork steady, and took another bite. They kept their voices light, talking across me, not to me. It had become their rhythm. Max nodding, Camille steering. I sat in the quiet center, invisible by design. Halfway through the meal, Camille leaned back, swirling her wine. "You know, it really might be time to simplify things," she said, looking at Max. "For everyone." He hesitated just a second, then glanced at me. I didn't react. My eyes stayed on my plate. "She hasn't been up to the cabin in, 3 years, Camille continued. "It's such a waste just sitting there. We could turn it into something useful. A proper family retreat." Max cleared his throat. "We'd keep it up. Maintain it. Better than letting it fall apart," Camille added smoothly, reaching for the breadbasket. "She wouldn't even notice." My hands didn't shake. I tore the bread in half and chewed slowly. Let them keep talking. I caught every word. Camille lowered her voice just slightly. "If we get her to sign soon, we could start renovations before fall. Imagine refinished floors, new deck." I picked up my notepad and slowly wrote a grocery item, just a prop. Camille glanced at it, but didn't read. She didn't need to. She thought I was scribbling nonsense like always. Max reached for more wine, but his hand faltered. I placed the pencil down and folded the paper anyway. Even pretend words carried weight. They thought I was absent, lost in the soft fog of age and silence. But I already had the attorney's number saved in my phone, and the appointment was set for tomorrow at 10. The house was quiet, but the vents weren't. It was near midnight when I heard the muffled click of Camille's heels down the hall. A door creaked, then her voice, sharp, low, and laced with impatience, trickled through the air duct above my bed. "I can't do this much longer," she hissed. "She just sits there, doesn't speak, doesn't move. It's like babysitting a statue." Silence. Then her laugh, dry, hollow. "No, Max doesn't get it. He still thinks she's fragile. But I'm telling you, once we get the cabin signed over, I'm done playing nursemaid." The phone rustled. More whispers I couldn't make out. I lay frozen, the edge of my blanket clenched in my fists. I'd heard a lot of things since my hearing returned, sly remarks, little cruelties, but this wasn't selfishness. It was calculation. They weren't just waiting for me to give in. They were counting on me to disappear. I sat up, my body trembling, not with fear, but rage. Quiet rage. The kind that hardens instead of explodes. I walked to the closet, careful not to let the old floorboards creak beneath me. The box I kept at the back, latched, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with Leonard's initials, hadn't been touched in years. I opened it slowly. Inside, the original deed to the cabin still in my name. The notarized will the land survey papers, the trust proposal Leonard and I never signed. They thought it was just a place, a piece of land. But it was where we honeymooned, where Max caught his first fish, where Leonard built a bench overlooking the lake and carved our initials into it. It wasn't just property. It was my last untouched memory. I closed the box and slid it beneath the bed. Let Camille keep talking. Let her plan. I had let them believe I was fragile for too long. Tomorrow, I'd start showing them who they were really dealing with. Winona Clark hadn't changed much. Same dark blazer, same sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, same no-nonsense tone. She didn't offer sympathy, not right away. She offered a chair, then opened a fresh legal pad. "So," she said, "start from the beginning." I did. I told her about the surgery, how I'd kept it quiet, how I let everyone believe I was still deaf. Then I told her what I heard, Camille's plans. Max's silence, the manipulation threaded through every conversation over meatloaf and manufactured smiles. Winona didn't interrupt. She just nodded now and then, making crisp notes. When I paused, she looked up. "They're not stupid," I said, "but they're arrogant. That makes them predictable. You've held on to the deed in a locked box. Original copy. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a folder already labeled with my name. Then here's what we'll do. We restructure the deed, move the cabin into a trust irrevocable. You choose the successor trustee, not your son. We update the will. Create a clause that limits access if conditions aren't met. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And they won't know. She smiled. They'll see what you want them to see. A woman who still signs, checks in silence, and nods politely at dinner. I looked down at my hands. They'd built gardens, held Leonard's face in the hospital, raised a boy who now looked through me like I was already gone. Let them keep talking, I said softly. They think I'm still deaf. That's their mistake. Winona slid the folder across the table. You've got more control than they realize. Let's remind them. As I signed the first page, I felt something shift. Not a loud change, just quiet power returning to the place it belonged. When I left her office, the wind had picked up. I zipped my coat, tightened my scarf, and made my way down the sidewalk past the coffee shop Camille said was too expensive for someone like me. I walked in and ordered the strongest cup they had. The smell of coffee had once been comforting. Leonard used to grind the beans himself, slow and careful humming, while the kettle whistled. Now the scent just reminded me how much of this house no longer belonged to me. Sunday morning, Camille was in the kitchen, tapping her nails against the counter as she waited for the machine to finish brewing. Her voice was louder than it needed to be, just enough to be overheard from the hallway, but not enough to be called out for it. She just nods and smiles like a pet, she said to someone on speaker. No clue what's happening. I swear it's like living with a statue. The other woman laughed, one of Camille's sisters, probably. I recognized the brittle tone. Camille continued pouring herself a mug. Max says she's happy just being left alone. But honestly, I don't think she even notices what's been moved around anymore. She probably thinks we're doing her a favor. I stepped into the room quietly. The laughter stopped. Camille glanced at me with that rehearsed little smile. I nodded and sat at the small kitchen table. My hands were steady as I stirred the mug she placed in front of me. I didn't flinch when she sat across from me, eyeing the corners of the room like she was calculating square footage. I sipped, slowly. When she turned to adjust the blinds, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the manila folder Winona had handed me, and slipped it into the canvas tote at my feet. The trust papers. The new will. The asset freeze. All signed. Camille was still talking about light fixtures. I stirred my coffee again, the spoon clinking gently against ceramic. Let her keep going. Tomorrow I'd test just how much she thought I didn't know. They came on a Wednesday, dressed too nicely for a casual visit. Max wore a pressed shirt, no tie, and Camille was in one of those neutral-toned blouses that always looked more expensive than they should be. She carried a leather folder under her arm. We thought we'd help you get some of the paperwork in order, Camille said sweetly as they settled into the living room. Just some organizational stuff. Easier now than later. She tried to speak very slowly and exaggerated their mouth movements so I could read their lips. Max looked uncomfortable. That was something at least. Camille opened the folder and spread out a stack of neatly clipped documents on the coffee table. We had the lawyer draw up some standard forms. Mostly name updates. Emergency contact info. Small transfers just to make sure things are clear if anything happens. I picked up one of the sheets, my hands steady. Near the bottom in smaller font was a line about property reassignment, something that wouldn't raise suspicion unless you were looking for it. I tilted my head slightly, then looked to Camille and gestured at the page. She leaned in, eager. This one just updates title language, she said, tapping her manicured nail. No big deal, really. Standard. I blinked twice, as if confused. Reached for my notepad and wrote, "Maybe go over it again." Slowly, Camille didn't hesitate. She repeated the lie this time with more confidence. I watched her face. She didn't even blink. Max stayed quiet. I handed the page back and smiled. Ruby didn't ask questions when I handed her the tiny mic and pointed to the vent in the guest room. She nodded once and installed it that afternoon while Camille was out at a nail appointment and Max was working in the garage. That night, I waited. They came into the guest room late, thinking I'd gone to bed, thinking I wouldn't hear even if I were awake. But I was wide awake, and this time, I had more than memory to hold on to. "She's dragging her feet again?" Camille snapped, her voice clipped. "She's not stupid, Camille," Max said quieter. "Maybe she's just being cautious." Camille scoffed. "She's old, that's all. She'll cave. Just keep nudging her." A pause, then the sound of pacing. "I'm not waiting another year," she muttered. "I want my name on the cabin before summer. We could be renting it out already." My stomach clenched. They weren't even pretending it was about family anymore. Not about preserving a legacy or taking care of me. It was about money, possession, control. I sat at my desk, earbuds in recording software, open every word coming in crisp and clear. Camille's voice was steady, rehearsed. Max's silence was heavier than any accusation. I saved the file then again under a backup name, burned it to a USB stick, sealed it inside a small velvet jewelry box I hadn't opened in years. The next morning, I wrote a short note in careful script. "If anything happens to me, play this first." I folded it, tucked it inside the box, and slid the whole thing into the drawer of my nightstand beneath a stack of old greeting cards. Camille and Max were out back the next evening, measuring space for a pergola they hadn't asked permission to build. I watched them through the window, coffee in hand, while the weight of the truth sat quietly inside my dresser. Tomorrow, I would invite them to dinner. Nothing fancy, but the dessert would leave a bitter taste they wouldn't forget. I told them it was just dinner. To talk about the future, I wrote on the notepad I left on the kitchen counter that morning. Camille replied with a thumbs up and a forced smile, the kind she saves for polite company and photo ops. They arrived at 6 sharp. Camille in heels and soft beige silk, Max in a blazer he hadn't worn since Leonard's funeral. She carried a bottle of wine. "Thought it might pair nicely with whatever you've made," she said. I nodded and took it without comment. We sat. We ate. I kept my eyes low and my voice absent. I let them speak about contractors' baby names and how they were thinking of making the cabin a real family hub. Camille slipped it in with a grin, tapping her glass as if it were all settled. I cleared the dishes slowly, careful with each plate. Ruby brought out the pie apple, slightly burnt at the edges, just how Leonard liked it. I poured coffee, the good kind, and placed the small speaker I'd hidden in my cardigan onto the table just beside the sugar jar. Camille reached for her fork. "Smells amazing, Maris." I pressed play. At first there was only the scrape of a chair, then Camille's voice, unmistakable, crisp and clear. "She's dragging her feet again. She's old. She'll cave. I want my name on the cabin before summer." Max froze mid-sip. Camille's fork hovered in the air. She looked at me, then at the speaker, then back again. The audio continued. We could be renting it out already. Her face drained of color. Her jaw tightened, but no sound came. I stood calm and still. "That's what you said," I said, voice steady, "while you thought I couldn't hear." Camille opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Max reached for her hand. She pulled it away. I picked up the envelope from the sideboard and laid it beside her plate. "This," I said, "is the future." And then I walked into the kitchen where the real papers were waiting. I came back from the kitchen carrying the envelope sealed and thick and placed it gently between their dessert plates. Camille hadn't touched her pie. Max had stopped pretending to breathe evenly. "Since you love paperwork," I said. Camille blinked like someone had tossed cold water at her. Her hand hovered over the envelope, but she didn't open it. Max reached for it instead. He unfolded the first page, scanned it, and leaned back in his chair like the air had been pulled from the room. "It's done," I said. The cabin deed has been moved into an irrevocable trust. Not under my name, not under yours. You can't sell it. You can't borrow against it. You can't touch it, Camille snapped. You tricked us. I raised an eyebrow. No, I listened. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked to Max. He didn't meet her eyes. His fingers tightened around the envelope. You went behind our backs, she said. I took a long sip of coffee. So did you. Camille stood furious now. We've been helping you for years. Driving you cooking. You replaced my things. You tracked my accounts. You lied to my face. I let my voice harden just enough. That's not care. That's a plan. She stilled. I may have been deaf, I said, but I was never blind. Max stood slowly, placing the envelope back on the table. We should go. Camille grabbed her purse and walked out without another word. Max hesitated. Mom, I waved a hand gently. You made your choice, Max. Let's not pretend you didn't. The door closed behind them with a hollow click. I sat alone, finished my coffee, and let the quiet settle back in. It didn't feel like it used to. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace.